Another claims he and Hickson were levitated into the spacecraft.
Literally have an alien base and going into meetings with these things and making intergalactic deals.
Probes put around me, experiments done on me.
It had blue flashing lights.
As of recent years, it seems that UFOs, or UAPs, have been making more and more headlines. The mysterious and glooming thought of extraterrestrial life, possibly more advanced than the human civilization, has plagued the thoughts of mankind since the earliest known sighting reported back in 1440 BC. And by now, anyone who's even heard the word UFO gets the idea: a flying saucer, disc-shaped, shiny metal. We know these facts because of the reports of other people, but in recent years, there has been a spike in reports of a craft more abnormal: the triangles. In 1952, the U.S. Air Force coined the term unidentified flying objects, and since then, people have claimed to see UFOs that are shaped and sized differently than what had become the norm at that time. Standing out amongst the bunch are the arrowhead or triangular spacecrafts. David Marler, author of Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation, said that he has reviewed more than 17,000 cases related to the UFO triangles, and since 1990, there have been over 4,000 sightings in Britain alone. A similar number of sightings have also been reported throughout Belgium, France, Holland, and Germany. Based on the reports of the flying triangles, these are the most common characteristics. The shape of the craft obviously is triangular. However, there are some reports noting that the corners are rounded off. Something that's relatively strange is that in almost all cases, no sound can be heard from the aircraft, even when the craft takes off at impossible speeds. However, if one is standing directly under the triangle, they often report hearing a rumbling or buzzing noise. Lights on the craft tend to vary from different reports, and are often described in one of three groups. The first being white flashes, the second being colored flashes, and the third being an orange glow. Something that typically stands out in a triangle UFO report is a brilliant and almost blinding flash of white light. Some witnesses have reported that after coming in contact with the triangle, the air in the surrounding area seems to be charged with static, which some UFOologists believe to be proof that the extraterrestrial craft are not moved by conventional jet power. From witness reports, it seems that the speed of the craft operates in 2 to 3 modes. The first is hovering, and the second would be a more normal speed, anywhere from 55 to 100 miles per hour. And the third would be an extremely fast takeoff, in which the triangle is gone in a split second. Also, the height at which the crafts are usually seen are very low, which is unusual considering the fact that most reports compare the size of it to a football field. For an example of just how low they are sometimes seen, some people have reported seeing them just above the roof of a home or creeping upon the mountaintops. Something to also note is that the craft is most commonly seen in the evening, during the hours of darkness, in autumn and in winter. In May of 1969, the crew of the oil tanker named British Grenadier were sailing through the Gulf of Mexico when suddenly everyone realized that there was something silently hanging in the air, where it would continue to menacingly hover above them for the next 3 days. According to the reports, the craft was a dark blue in color during the day, and as the sun fell, the ship appeared as a silvery light. On the first day of its arrival, and exactly 1 minute after midnight, the ship's engine suddenly stopped, and the crew were only left with emergency lighting and steering. However, after some amount of time, they successfully restarted the engines. The only strange thing to occur on the second day were all the refrigerators being closed down, with no reason for the event ever being found. On the third day, at 11:45 p.m., one of the crew members noticed that the lights were out in the ship's air conditioning room, and a door leading to the crew's accommodation was open. The crew member passed through the open door in order to investigate, and began speaking with 2 firemen. However, the next day, that very same door that the crew member had walked into was welded shut. Apparently, due to a fault, the door had been welded shut way before the crew took off. But that very crew member had sworn that he was in the room the previous night talking to 2 firemen. That same night, exactly 1 minute after midnight, the engines would be shut off once again. They were restarted for a second time, but it was later discovered that the starter motor for the emergency diesel generator had been dismantled. All the parts of the generator were found neatly placed beside the machine, and at exactly noon on the third day, the craft had vanished in the same mysterious manner that it appeared in. All these events were documented and recorded in the ship's log. The crew went on with their jobs, and it was something that was never talked about again. in Hudson Valley, just an hour's drive north of New York City, on the brink of New Year's 1981. There would begin a string of triangular UFO sightings for the next 5 years. On December 31st, a retired policeman was sitting in his backyard in Kent, New York, when he spotted a group of strange lights in the south direction. He described that the lights consisted of a brilliant red, green, and white, and at first, he took it as nothing more than an airplane in distress. However, he quickly realized something was wrong when he analyzed not only how low the craft was able to fly, but how quiet it was. As the lights came closer, he could hear a faint humming sound, and he was able to point out that the lights were arranged in a triangular pattern. This exact type of report would be repeated many times throughout Hudson Valley, and over the next few years, all of them were strikingly similar. Hundreds of witnesses reported the similar, strange, triangle-shaped lights in the sky. On March 26, 1983, an article about the sightings appeared on the front page of Westchester Rockland Daily Item. The article talked about the many reports of the strange phenomena. The press coverage was enough to draw the attention of a UFO investigation group, who were associated with acclaimed scientist and UFOologist Allen Hynek. The group conducted a professional and thorough investigation and ultimately followed up with the book, Night Siege: The Hudson Valley UFO Sightings. The group set up a phone hotline and received over 300 calls from people who said that they've also seen the strange triangle-shaped craft. That very same night, the city of Yorktown also came forth with reports of the giant flying triangle. People from all over the surrounding area were calling the police to report the strange objects in the sky, and at one point, the police switchboard were jammed with so many calls related to UFO sightings that they were worried about not being able to respond to other emergencies. Altogether, from 1981 to 1983, Hudson Valley would come out with over 5,000 reports, and many tried to explain the strange sightings, but to this day, no definite answers were ever found. The St. Petersburg incident is one of the most witnessed and highly recorded incidents in the history of UFOlogy. On February 19, 1997, at around 7 p.m., the residents in the city of St. Petersburg noticed a cluster of lights hovering overhead. Just after 7 p.m., air traffic controllers at the local airport also saw the strange objects appear on their radar screens. And just over the airport, the unexplainable lights were clearly visible in the night sky. Viktor Lakstushin was one of the air traffic controllers working that night, who decided to step outside to witness the event. He began sketching out what he was seeing as others watched through binoculars. Reports of the strange craft came in from different locations around the area, and many people were able to catch the craft on film. In particular, an economics student, Yuri Arzemestyv, had noticed the lights through his kitchen window and rushed outside with his camera to record this footage. The incident garnered much attention, and later it would be officially investigated by Naval Captain Pavel Serenchko. However, even after grabbing large amounts of evidence, Serenchenko could not come up with answers or an explanation behind the event. The strangest part of the story is the reports of the appearance of a triangular-shaped craft just before the lights in the sky would be seen. The objects hovered over the city for over 20 minutes, and at around 7:20 p.m., they disappeared, never to be seen again. Temperatures for January in Illinois have averaged around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and everyone who could were staying nice and warm in their home on that night. A man by the name of Melvin Knoll ran a miniature golf course and was worried that the weather may have frozen something at his business, so he dressed as warm as he could and headed out to check on everything. When he arrived, he noticed a very distinct bright star towards the northeast. Melvin shrugged it off and went to check on the golf course. And after seeing that everything was okay, he got back in his truck and was about to head home. But that bright star had caught his eye again. And as he kept his eyes fixated on it, he realized that it was coming straight towards him. And as it hovered dangerously close to him, he could see red lights shining towards the ground, and described it as a tall, two-story building with windows. The craft made no sound as it silently hovered past Melvin, heading in the southwest direction. Melvin feared that he would be made fun of or thought to be crazy if he couldn't provide any proof to his story, and so he decided to head down to the local police station. And after telling the dispatcher his story, he asked her to pass the information to the next town that the object would be passing through, which was Central Communications in St. Clair County, and she agreed. Central Communication then relayed the report to the Lebanon Police Department, and at exactly 4:10 a.m., a Lebanon police officer hearing the radio report spotted a bright object. He could clearly see two lights that were very close to one another. The officer then flipped his lights on and sped to the southeast direction in hopes of seeing the craft up close with more detail. As he was trying not to lose sight of the two strange lights, he noticed that those two lights had merged into one. The object seemed to be changing course and was now moving toward him. At this point, the officer pulled over and stopped the car, rolled his window down, and watched in shock as he very clearly observed a triangular-shaped UFO pass directly over him, before the UFO quickly changed course and moved west. And as the giant triangle moved from his direction, the officer radioed St. Clair County Emergency Dispatch with his report on the craft, and advised them of the direction it was heading in, and told them to let officers around that area be notified to look for the craft. Officer Craig Stevens would then be the next person to see the UFO in the area of Milstead. Craig was on patrol and began driving to the north end of town to try and spot the craft. And while he was sitting in his patrol car, he also observed the very large flying object coming from the southward direction. He reported that it was flying very low. He also reported that it made no noise other than a very low buzzing sound. As the craft began passing by, Craig contacted dispatch to let them know that he had spotted the object. He then exited his patrol car and got his Polaroid camera from his trunk. He then attempted to take a picture of the craft. However, the camera wasn't working properly due to the extremely cold temperatures outside, and so the Polaroid picture came out very blurry and low grade. He then returned to the station and drew a rough sketch of the object and typed out a report of his observations that night. This very case was heavily investigated by professionals, and the entire case had its own episode on the Discovery Channel. However, no breakthroughs were ever made in the case, and the people of St. Clair have been left with no answers since that day. The Rendlesham Forest incident took place shortly after midnight on December 27, 1980. On that night, the radar screens at the RAF Watton Air Base had caught an unusual object which suddenly disappeared towards the vicinity of the Rendlesham Forest. The very same object was also tracked on the radar of a neighboring airbase named Bentwaters RAF, which was situated just north of the forest. Mal Shkura was a radar operator working that night and stated that no one at the base had any clue what the object was. They also checked with air traffic control and confirmed that there wasn't supposed to be anything coming through the area at the time. The only choice they were left with was to send in a jet to find out what it was. When the jet had gotten within a quarter of a mile of the craft, the pilot suddenly started reporting that they could see a very bright light in the sky in front of them. Back at the airbase, it remained stationary on the screen of the radar. Then, suddenly, within seconds, it moved off at an amazing speed, and within 5 minutes was reaching 90,000 feet and higher, before vanishing off the radar. Now, the events of the neighboring airbase Bentwaters RAF would begin with the sighting of a gigantic glowing object, seen by 3 security guards who were patrolling the twin bases. After they received permission to check out the strange sightings, they followed the lights into the forest, where they were expecting to see some sort of military or commercial aircraft that had crash-landed. However, they were shocked to see a saucer-like craft with small but large-headed beings that they described to be suspended from the bottom of the craft by a type of beam. The strange beings appeared to be fixing the craft and seemed unaware of the 3 men watching them. The guards radioed to the base headquarters to report what they were seeing and requested for backup. Almost immediately, assistance had arrived on the scene with a fully equipped armed unit, which included senior officers of the base. Later, there would come reports off the record that witnesses who ventured closest to the craft encountered strange anomalies, described only as reality-bending effects. Reports also came through that some of the senior officers were able to communicate with these strange alien beings. However, none of these facts have been established officially. Some of the most revealing details of the events of Rendlesham would be given by patrolmen Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, and Larry Warren, who would later co-write a book on the incident called Left at East Gate. There were many stories told by the men who were present on the night those strange events took place, one of the most remarkable of those stories being that several of the men were pulled into an underground facility by official-looking men in black. Once there, the men were shown a number of films of different UFO recoveries around the world. The events of 1980 were hidden from public knowledge for the most part, until 1983, when a relatively new UFO magazine article brought a slight passing interest. The story survived on rumor and speculation, until Robert Todd of the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy was able to secure a copy of an official report of the events through the Freedom of Information Act. The case, in some regard, is similar to the infamous Roswell, New Mexico incident, being a crash landing and involving only military personnel. This case is hard to deny, given the high level of personnel who had witnessed the event, and have little to no reason to lie about what they have seen that night. The most intriguing cases regarding UFOs are those with multiple sightings or witnesses, and if extremely lucky, photographs. And the Belgium UFO case marks everything on the list, and it's no surprise that it's one of the most celebrated and talked about cases. The events of November 1989 would be documented by 30 different groups of witnesses, and 3 separate groups of police officers. Every single one of the reports described a large object flying at a low altitude. The craft was described as a flat, triangular shape with lights below it. The giant triangular craft made no sound as it slowly moved across the landscape of Belgium. There was free sharing of information as the people of Belgium tracked the craft as it moved from the town of Liège to the border of the Netherlands and Germany. Similar to the Hudson Valley incident, the first sighting of the craft would spawn a wave of sightings and reports for over the next several months, and on 2 occasions, a pair of F-16 fighter jets chased the object, but were never able to catch it. On March 30th, 1990, a frantic call to military headquarters came from a Belgian national police captain. He was amazed at a giant triangle passing overhead, and simultaneously, 2 ground radar stations were reporting an object of unknown origins on their screen. After contacting other radar facilities, they learned that at least 4 other stations were also reporting the object on their screens, and said it was moving very, very slowly. This is when 2 F-16 fighter jets were ordered to intercept and identify this phenomenon. The pilot reported that only a few seconds after locking onto the target, the object began to pick up speed, quickly moving out of the radar's range. The triangular craft seemed to be playing a cat and mouse game with the F-16 fighter jet, before finally being lost in the night sky of Brussels. The pilots of the F-16 fighter jets reported that the UFO had made maneuvers at speeds beyond the capability of their technology, and said that the radar had showed the craft drop from 10,000 to 500 feet in just 5 seconds. The extraordinary sightings continued for months, as the triangular craft was witnessed more than 1,000 times, and the event became one of the biggest stories in the Belgian media. Another unusual occurrence associated with the Belgian UFO wave was the inability to take a clear picture of it. Many observers had their camera ready and took what they thought would be clear images of the craft. However, when the film was developed, the image would be blurred, and at best, you would have a very vague outline of the craft. One good image was finally captured on video in April of 1990. This image showed the underbelly of the craft with spotlights on the 3 corners. A still frame from this tape has been seen worldwide and has become something of a classic UFO photograph. With over 1,000 witnesses, confirmed radar sightings, plane radar lock-ins, and military confirmations, the fact that an unknown triangular craft had stalked the country of Belgium for over 7 months cannot be denied. March 13, 1997, a string of several lights would be witnessed and photographed throughout 5 cities in Arizona, the first being in Phoenix. The strange lights were spotted just over the Superstitious Mountains. The first reports indicated an object in the sky with 6 points of light, immediately followed by a report of 8 connected lights, with a separate ninth. The same exact formation was seen again over the Gila River just before 10 p.m. In a matter of minutes, the strange lights had made their way over the southern part of the city of Phoenix. At this time, literally thousands of people witnessed the objects. It was at this time that the first photographs and videos were taken. The final sightings of the night were in Rainbow Valley. Witnesses there reported a very distinct V formation of lights. Although the huge light formation seemed to move at a very low speed over Arizona, it was reported that strange lights had sped from the Henderson, Las Vegas, Nevada area toward Arizona and seemed to slow down as it entered the Arizona area. At one point, over Sky Harbor, it reportedly hovered for several minutes. The object was also reported to change shapes, speeds, and colors as it made its way across the Arizona skies. Between 9 and 9:30 p.m. on March 13th, one description was made by a family in Mesa. They said that an enormous craft with a distinctive structure flew over their area. They described a triangle-shaped object with lights at the three corners. Around this time, there were also several reports of two round objects which seemed to detach from the larger V-shaped objects, only to later rejoin them. One witness said that the V-shaped craft split into two separate crafts as it moved toward the city of Tucson. Another description of the V-shaped craft was made by a group of real estate agents who had subdivided property over the northern part of Phoenix. They estimated the craft to be a staggering 2 miles wide as it flew at low altitude near Phoenix. There was also two airplane pilots, one retired from an airline and the other from Vietnam, were at completely different places at different times, but both men reported seeing a low-flying craft of immense size around a mile long. It was almost inevitable that the United States Air Force would become involved in an event of this magnitude, and the Phoenix Lights mystery would be no exception. While driving down Interstate I-17 from Camp Verde, a truck driver had been seeing two amber-colored UFOs moving just ahead of him southward for 2 whole hours. His destination was a materials plant near Luke Air Force Base. Upon arriving there, the two UFOs hovered nearby. While his truck was being loaded, the driver walked upon a pile of materials to get a better look at the two UFOs. A band of red lights pulsated on the craft as it hovered near the Luke Air Force Base runway. Suddenly, two F-16 fighter jets blasted out of the Luke Air Force Base with their afterburners on full. Soon, a third plane followed, and all three made a direct run toward the hovering UFO. As the first two jets were about to reach the UFOs, the unknown objects shot straight up and disappeared in an instant. The two fighter jets flew right through the exact spot that the UFOs had previously been in. One of the more intriguing reports was submitted by a young man who claimed to be an airman stationed at Luke Air Force Base. On Friday at 3:20 a.m., he called in to the National UFO Reporting Center, almost 8 hours after the sightings on the previous night, and reported that two United States Air Force F-15C fighters had been scrambled from Luke Air Force Base and had successfully intercepted one of the objects. The airmen provided detailed information which proved to be highly accurate, based on what investigators would reconstruct from witnesses over the next following months. 2 days after his first telephone call, the airman called to report that he had just been informed by his commander that he was being transferred to an assignment in Greenland. After that phone call, he has never been heard from again. One of the most recent and compelling sightings was caught on camera on August 31st, 2018, when the videographer was heading to work in El Paso, Texas at 6:25 a.m. He spotted what looks like a glowing triangle in the sky and began taking pictures and videos. I picked these 8 certain cases because of the solid amount of evidence that each one contains. When people all around the world say they've seen something, it's hard to deny that. The easy answer would be to say that it's none other than a case of mass hysteria. But either way you put it, extraterrestrial vehicles and beings have been reported throughout history. The Pentagon has released footage of the tracking of a UFO, and the United States have put together multiple task forces since the 1950s for the purpose of studying UFOs. Project Blue Book, ATIP, and USAF, just to name a few. Some of the most famous cases involve people whose lives have been summarized to witnessing a UFO or extraterrestrial beings, such as Bob Lazar or the case of Barney and Betty Hill. But all these topics are for a different time. Today, I just wanted to go over a more rare and intriguing form of UFO sightings. However, just like any UFO case or story, we do not have the proof to say that there is, without a doubt, other life forms out there. But in the words of Arthur Clarke, two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe, or we're not. Both are equally terrifying.